I still remember the rainy afternoon when my mother-in-law first sat by my window, her silver hair sparkling under the yellow light. She held my hand tightly and said something that made me shiver. "Can you please do me a favor?" Those words were like a knife to my heart when she continued, "My mother only wishes to have a grandchild before she runs out of time." At first I misunderstood, thinking she was asking for something beyond her limits, but she quickly shook her head, waved her hand, and explained that she only wished her daughter and I could give her a pearl to make up for the years she had silently endured and raised her child. I choked up with pity, knowing this was a very ordinary wish, but too great for someone who was quietly counting time, and promised her that I would try, even though my heart was filled with resentment because my wife was not ready and I could not decide for her. In the following days, I always paid more attention to my mother-in-law, bringing her favorite meals, fixing the old wooden chair, taking her to the park, trying to create a warm atmosphere so that my wife and mother could be closer without forcing her. But everything was unintentionally filled with tension. When my wife discovered the medical records, my mother hid in the drawers, she cried, asking why my mother had to endure alone, blaming me for knowing but not telling her. And for the first time, I saw my mother-in-law as weak as a child when she was released because she didn't want her daughter to worry. The three of us sat together. The mother held her daughter's hand and whispered her last wish. "I just want to hold my grandchild." My wife was stunned by that request, not because of coercion, but because she blamed herself for letting her mother live in longing for so long. And after a few nights of thinking, she told me that she wanted a child, not because anyone told her to, but because she was afraid that one day she would regret it if she didn't do what her mother longed for. I was overjoyed but still afraid, because right after that, my mother-in-law's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She fainted in the mental hospital and was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The doctor said she needed to be taken care of immediately. The days in the hospital were a long series of heavy days. Sometimes she woke up smiling. Sometimes she was unconscious, breathing weakly, like someone whose life had been taken away. My wife was both pregnant and exhausted from worry. The two of us took turns watching over the bed so that my mother would never be alone. There was one time in the middle of the night, my mother called me over, put in my hand the gold bracelet she had kept for years as a promise. Then she whispered, "You must protect my daughter. If she falls, don't leave her." No matter what happens, I took her hand and promised, my voice more determined than my usual voice. "I promise, Mom. I won't leave her alone." Then a miracle, like a glimmer of light in the dark night, fell. After much effort, my wife tested the stick and saw 2 lines. The whole family held their breath and burst into tears when they heard the news. My mother-in-law put her trembling hand on her daughter's belly and cried for the first time in many months. She truly cried out of happiness, not out of pain. Since hearing the news, her spirit changed markedly. Her sadness disappeared, her smile appeared more. She looked up at the sky and the earth, like someone who had been given back hope. Sometimes she talked to her unborn belly, calling out affectionate names, singing the song she used to sing to her daughter when she was a child. We took turns taking care of her. The times I pushed her out to the hospital yard in the afternoon. The times I pushed the car for her, and she suddenly asked, "Are you scared?" I answered honestly, "Yes. I'm most scared that you won't see me in time." And she just smiled gently, as if to dispel all worries, so no one would be more heartbroken. The following months were a series of days when the whole family lived between hope and fear. My wife had severe morning sickness, was tired, but still persevered to go to the hospital, sat holding my mother's hand for hours in silence, whispering Grandma must wait for Chow. And I tried my best to fulfill both roles, husband, son-in-law, and adopted son, who loved my mother-in-law like her own mother, bringing the warmest atmosphere possible to her. There were nights when my wife sat awake by the window, covering her mouth and sobbing for fear that my mother would hear. I hugged her silently in the dark, and we both promised each other that no matter how difficult the journey was, we would overcome it so that my mother could see her grandchild. Then one afternoon when it rained heavily, the hospital called urgently. My mother-in-law was in critical condition and could not survive. Grandma Nam was on oxygen. Her mouth mumbled the things she cherished. If she went first to tell Chow, that her grandmother had loved her since before she was born. Those words were like needles piercing our hearts, making my wife collapse, but also motivating us both to cling to hope. And hope pulled her back the next morning. The mother who had passed away put her hand on her daughter's belly and smiled, like someone who had been given another day. The brother who had passed away, she lit up miraculously, making both my third wife and I cry, not because of sadness anymore, but because of the indescribable joy of seeing. A mother's love can be so strong, to hold on to life. From that moment, our whole family entered a new chapter. The months of waiting for the baby to be born are filled with the care, sacrifice, and endurance of 3 generations: mother-in-law, umbrella, and breast. Living with new hope, my wife, while nursing her pregnancy, learned how to become a mother. Sometimes loving softly but always determined because of the promise she made to her mother, and I stood by her side being her support. Taking care of every little thing, sharing the beautiful days mixed with fear. Our story is not only a journey of giving birth, but also a journey of love, of promises given, of cool drops of water exchanged for smiles, and of a belief that no matter how short time is, sincere love can brighten the darkest days. And when the child is born, whether the ending can be a warm and complete ending or a regret in the heart of each person left, will forever carry the image of the mother who fought with all her might to see the pearl, and the image of 2 young people who chose to hold hands to keep the promise to the person who gave them a lifetime of love. Since the day my mother-in-law regained consciousness, my whole family's life seemed to have been breathed with new life, although there were still many hidden worries, and every morning when we opened our eyes and saw her, still sitting there leaning against the pillow, smiling a little when she saw us entering the hospital room. Every morning feeling lucky once again, I noticed that she had changed very clearly, no longer looking sad like the first days, but like someone who had just found a reason to continue living. She ate more, did physical therapy even though sometimes she was out of breath and tired while doing it. She said, "I have to be strong to hold my grandchild." And my wife's belly started to get a little smaller. Every night the couple lay next to each other, listening to the sound of rain falling on the roof and the sound of my mother in the next room, coughing softly. Then I got up to make a cup of hot milk to bring to her. And she said, "What kind of son-in-law is he?" Even more so than his own son. Nights like that made me feel that my family was getting closer in a very strange way, not ostentatious, not noisy, just small actions, gathered into a feeling that was stronger than blood ties. When my mother-in-law's health improved, the doctor sent her home for treatment, so our small house was lit up every afternoon. She liked to sit on the porch, listening to the wind while my wife sat next to her, massaging her hand and telling her stories. Sometimes she leaned her head on our daughter's shoulder, her eyes half closed and her hand on my wife's belly, as if to feel every movement, even though the baby still couldn't kick yet. Those simple moments made me believe that all the efforts we had made were worth it. One day, when I had just brought her a bowl of hot porridge, she asked me to sit down and slowly told me about the years she had raised her daughter, alone the days when she was so tired, that she cried while holding her because she was afraid she couldn't raise her. Now that our daughter had grown up, had a husband, and was about to become a mother, she only wished to see our small family in peace. I listened to my stepmother and felt every word, as if it touched the softest place in my heart, and I understood why. The desire to hold her grandchild was not just a wish, but like the last piece of her life. Time passed faster than we thought. In the blink of an eye, my wife had entered her 6th month. Her belly was rounder and heavier, walking was more difficult, and her mother-in-law asked every day. Watching her take her medicine was no different than stabbing a child. One day she even insisted on cooking, even though her hands were shaking so much that she dropped the spoon on the ground. I had to run over to help her and say, "Mom, just think, let me do it." She was pregnant but still smiled as she watched me busily in the kitchen. By the 7th month, my wife began to feel the baby kicking more clearly, and her mother-in-law was like someone who had received a priceless gift. Every time the baby kicked, she propped herself up on her hands, placed her trembling hands on her daughter's belly, and laughed like a child, then kept whispering, "Be good, baby. I'm waiting for you." I looked at mother and child, coughing, and felt strangely warm, even though I knew that fear was still somewhere in our every breath, because mother's illness was still there. just rekindled by a desire stronger than the pain. But it was her cool gaze towards the future that made me believe that our family could reach the ending that everyone dreamed of. In recent days, she often told me that when the baby was born, she wanted to hold the baby for the first time, wanted to hear the first cry, wanted to see the tiny face and then smile to reassure her. I didn't dare to promise, but I held her hand and said that we would do everything possible to make that day come true, because the baby was not only our child, but also the last life that she had clung to throughout her illness. And so our journey continues. Not as grand as anyone else. Just long days filled with hope. Evenings where the three of us sat next to each other while having dinner and telling stories. Nights where I stayed up to straighten my mother-in-law's legs and then turned to hug my wife, feeling the breathing of the two women I love in two different ways, but both with all my heart. I know the rest of the story is still ahead, where there could be tears, there could be smiles, but in the days when my mother-in-law was still holding our hands and my wife was still carrying the little creature growing in her belly every day, we only had one thing for sure. This family had fought together and would continue to hold hands until we welcomed the little angel that my mother-in-law had longed for all her life. On the day of birth, our small house had an atmosphere that was both nervous and warm, to the point that every small sound startled my mother-in-law and asked if my wife had a stomach ache. She was so careful that every night she would sit down and fold the tiny baby clothes that she had prepared since the 4th month, her old eyes shining with a passionate hope, like someone who had gathered each day of her life to wait for a single moment. On the nights my wife had trouble sleeping, I would rub her back while my mother-in-law would stand up. Even though she was tired, she would still sneak over to see if there was a place to make warm water or cook something. I had to hold her hand, gently coax her to sit down, and then softly say that as long as she rested, she would have helped us a lot, but she still said, "I can do it. I still have the strength," which made me feel both pity and pity. One afternoon, the weather suddenly turned cold. My wife complained of a heavy stomach and a slight pain in her back. My mother-in-law immediately panicked, as if she was afraid of abandoning the most important thing in her life. She took her daughter's hand, gently rubbed it, then pressed her face against her stomach, whispering the baby's name, as if to reassure all three of us. Time passed quietly, like a rushing stream that no one could hold back, and the closer it got, the more pain she felt. That day was just the pain of menstruation, not labor, and when the doctor said everything was fine, my mother-in-law breathed a sigh of relief, so much that she lost her sight, tears that she tried to hide, as if her lips were so worried that she was afraid she wouldn't be able to see the real baby on that important day. From that day on, she practiced walking even harder, using a cane to stand, muttering, "So that when I give birth, I can stand up and hold my grandchild." I heard it and choked up, and my wife hugged her mother and cried with love. In the last days before giving birth, the house was like a cocoon wrapped in moisture and anticipation. My mother-in-law often sat leaning against the door, looking out as if looking into the future. Every time she heard a baby crying at the neighbor's house, she glanced at her daughter's belly and smiled, her trembling hand gently stroking the baby's belly, as if touching the baby. The night before the planned date, my mother-in-law called me out to the porch, where the dim yellow light illuminated her face. She told me that if anything happened tomorrow, she wanted me to promise her one thing. Whether I'm still alive or not, you must love your wife and children and give the child a complete family. I held her hand for a long time. Her hand was cold and light as paper, but the moisture seemed to penetrate my heart. I told her that she would live long enough to see her grandchild grow up to hear her call grandmother. And I believed that with all I had. The next morning, when taking my wife to the hospital, my mother-in-law sat in a wheelchair, her hands trembling, not because of the cold, but because of emotion. She held my hand tightly all the way from the hospital gate to the waiting room, not leaving her daughter's belly for a second, as if she wanted to engrave that moment in her mind. When the operating room door closed, she was floating, her eyes filled with fear and hope. And I sat between the two most important women in my life, feeling all the responsibility and love in the world condensed into a fleeting moment that seemed to last forever. And then in the middle of the moonlit hallway, the baby's cry rang out, small, weak but resounding like a bell, waking up the world, causing the mother in-law to jump up from the wheelchair, even though her legs were still shaking, her two hands clutching her chest while welling up. Before the doctor came out to announce, in that moment it was as if time stopped, leaving only the baby's cry and the choked sobs of the old mother, who had waited almost her whole life to hear that sound. When the nurse took the baby out, the mother-in-law raised her trembling hands, not having enough strength to hold it, but still touched the baby's cheek, her dry hands touching the milky, soft skin. She cried silently, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't, and I knew that moment was what she had been holding on to for months. From that moment, I deeply understood that a mother's love could keep them alive, stronger than any medicine, and our small family entered a new chapter, where the child's cry turned into the old mother's laughter, where promises and hopes were no longer just words, but became real moisture, bringing 3 generations together in a love so strong that no time could break it. When my mother-in-law touched the baby's cheek, I saw in her eyes a light that I had never seen in all this time, the light of someone who had just completed the most important thing in her life, and also the light of someone who had just found the vitality that seemed to have dried up. She smiled while tears still lingered on her cheeks. That smile was both weak and strong, that I felt my heart sink, and the baby opened its mouth to cry softly, as if recognizing the warmth of the person who had called its name every night. After my wife was taken out of the operating room, my mother-in-law sat by the bed, holding her daughter's hand, her hand trembling but determined, gently stroking the sweaty hair on my wife's forehead, then looked at me with a look of gratitude mixed with pride, as if she was looking at the complete family that she had waited her whole life to witness. In the first days after giving birth, despite her poor health, my mother-in-law still tried to do everything she could. She learned how to change diapers and how to lull the baby to sleep, even though her hands were shaking so much that it took her almost a minute to button a small button. Every time the baby cried, she would pick him up and hold him close to her chest, as if holding the world in her skinny arms. Sometimes she was so weak that she sat there gasping for breath, but she still smiled and said that the baby's cry helped her feel alive. Many nights I woke up to the sound of the wind blowing on the porch, seeing my mother-in-law sitting in the dark, talking, her hand gently stroking the baby's tiny feet, and her mouth whispering lullabies that she used to sing to my wife when she was a baby. Her voice was trembling but moist, and each sentence was filled with indescribable emotion. After a month of the baby, the mother-in-law's health showed signs of weakening again. She ate less, slept fitfully, and sometimes sat there looking far away, as if she was trying to preserve everything in her memory every time I gently placed the pearl in her hand. And just by feeling the baby's moisture, she immediately woke up, her smile returned. Her eyes lit up as if the baby was a string, pulling her from the depths of fatigue back to the world. One evening, while I was rocking the baby to sleep, she called me out, where the yellow light covered her face, with a strange peace. She asked me if I knew why she wanted a grandchild so much. I was silent, and she answered herself, saying that old age made time for her, like fingers sliding on water, touching but unable to hold. And she only prayed for something for her heart to cling to remind her that she still had meaning, was still a part of the future. I listened and my chest tightened. Unable to speak, I just held her hand tightly, as if to replace every word with warmth. From that day on, I spent more time taking care of both my wife and mother-in-law. One day I carried the baby around the house, and my mother-in-law propped herself up on her hands and watched her, eyes full of affection. She said that every time she heard her grandchild cry or laugh, she felt as if her heart was repaired, as if the void that she had silently endured for decades was filled. When the baby was more than 2 months old, my mother-in-law insisted on carrying the baby out to the yard, even though it was a bit cold. I put a coat on her, helped her to the old wooden chair in front of the house. She sat down and hugged the baby to her chest, her face sparkling, as if looking at the most beautiful thing in her life. She inhaled the baby's scent deeply, as if wanting to keep it in every breath, then suddenly turned to me, her voice trembling but gentle. "Mom, thanks you. Thank you for going through this journey with me." I sat down next to her, saw her close her eyes and lean on Chow's head. The soft smile on her lips made that moment so beautiful that I wished time would stop, the basket would rot, and the whole world would stand still, so she could hold Chow a little longer. That night when I carried the baby into the bedroom, my mother-in-law said she wanted to sleep early. I kicked her leg. She held my hand for a while, longer than usual before letting go, and in her eyes there was something both peaceful and deep, making me feel like she had put down all the burdens of her whole life. That night, the whole house was immersed in a strange silence, not a fearful silence, but like a long sigh after months of trying, and I stood between the two rooms, where my wife was sleeping and where my mother-in-law was thinking clearly, feeling that tomorrow, the lives of all three of us would enter a completely new chapter. Whether that chapter was a smile or a loss, we would hold hands and walk through it. He stood still in front of the room when he heard his mother-in-law sigh. That strong woman had long considered him as her own son, but loneliness and the pressure of old age were eating away at her every day. He knew she no longer dared to speak her mind about her desire to be a king, especially after the long conversation the day before that had moved her to tears. He walked in, gently placed the bag of fruit on the table, and sat down next to her, still keeping a distance, enough for her to feel comfortable. He said in a voice as light as the afternoon wind that he still remembered her words, was still trying to build a family life so that one day he could make her smile truly. His mother-in-law looked at him for a long time, her eyes both warm and sad, as if she wanted to say something, but then stopped. She only said that she believed in him and her daughter. It was just that time passed so quickly that she felt she was no longer strong enough to see the good things in the future. He was silent when he heard those words. It was not a selfish or wrong wish, but simply the very real worry of a mother who had lived most of her life. He gently held her hand, saying that she was not alone, that this family still had him, his wife, and a future waiting ahead. His mother-in-law trembled slightly when she heard those words, not because of excessive emotion, but because of the feeling of being comforted, of being understood by someone, something she had not felt for a long time. She turned away, gently wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she told him not to put pressure on her, that as long as he lived a good life, loved his family, that was enough for her. But he knew that wasn't the case. He understood what she was really afraid of: the empty house, the lonely meals, the children's laughter no longer appearing in her life. And with that thought, he was even more determined to resolve all the gaps that existed between him and his wife. That afternoon, when the three of them ate dinner together, he intentionally created a happier atmosphere, talked about work, asked about his mother-in-law, and gave her the best food. His mother-in-law looked at him for a long time, smiling for the first time in many months. "That's me," when my mother-in-law returned to the room. He only said a very small sentence, as soft as a promise, "I will do it. Don't worry." She looked at him, her deep eyes filled with 100 emotions, but this time she didn't cry anymore. She just nodded, the corners of her mouth slightly curved up, a rare smile of reassurance. The scene in the room ended, and he understood that the story between him and his mother-in-law did not end there. It was not a matter of wishing for something beyond the boundary, but a relationship filled with responsibilities, expectations, and unspeakable emotions. Emotions that could not be named, but made him want to protect this family even more,